Youth here would like to begin by acknowledging that we are gathered here today on Gadigal country. We pay our respects to the traditional custodians and elders past and present who always have and always will belong to this land. We extend our gratitude to the traditional custodians across Australia who have cared for country for many thousands of years and continue to do so through their enduring connections to lands, waters, skies, and communities. In recent centuries, Australia has provided a home to our Jewish communities, and we therefore recognise our responsibilities and obligations to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples as Australia's first peoples, whose presence, cultures, knowledge and diversity are vital to the nation we share. We walk together with respect and care on this land, that which sustains the spirit of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples, and which now sustains us all.
Good evening, everyone, and thank you for joining us tonight for Youth Here's third annual Yom HaShoah commemoration. We would like to acknowledge the Holocaust survivors who join us here tonight and continue to share their stories. Tonight, we welcome the Honourable Mark Corey MP, Minister for Multiculturalism, Youth Here co-founders and alumni, friends, leaders, and community members. Yom HaShoah is the International Day of Commemoration for the 6 million Jews who perished in the Holocaust. Shoah is the Hebrew word for catastrophe. And on Yom HaShoah, we come together to reflect on the utter catastrophe endured by the Jewish people at the hands of the Nazi regime. Since 2017, our organisation has been dedicated to mitigating hate in society by connecting young Australians with the memory of the Holocaust. We aim to provide a platform for young adults to engage in a way that remains meaningful and relevant. Because in order to ensure that we never forget, we must make sure that we continue to remember. Please rise for the Australian National Anthem led by Eden Shafroni.
Australians, oh, let us rejoice, for we are one and free. We've golden soil and wealth for toil. Our home is goodbye sea. Our land abounds in nature's gifts of beauty, rich and rare. In history's page, let every stage advance Australia fair. In joyful strains, then let us sing, advance Australia fair.
What are we doing here? Once a year, we come together on Yom HaShoah to commemorate the Holocaust. But what does it mean to commemorate? For us, commemoration is our opportunity to remember those we lost, to honour those who survived, and to learn from the tragedy so that we can truly say never again with meaning and purpose. When it comes to remembering, honouring, and learning, there is no substitute for the privilege of hearing the story of a survivor firsthand. George Sternfeld is a funny, warm, and resilient man, never without a kind word or one of his iconic bow ties. Sarah and I were fortunate to sit down with George, who was generous enough to open up his home and share his story with us. We have since documented this story and want to share it with you here tonight. Born in Warsaw, Poland in 1939, George was just a baby when war broke out in Europe, at the start of some of the darkest times in human history.
So when she took me, went towards a new border, which was a river book. She needed to organize a river crossing, and the man who agreed to take her across warned her that she has to make sure that the baby doesn't cry. So my mum had an answer for it. She kept chocolate to my mouth, and that's how she secured my silence. I usually tell that this caused me to have an addiction, a lifetime addiction to chocolate.
When George's mother eventually arrived in Bialystok, her husband was nowhere to be found. After a long while of waiting for his wife to arrive, George's father had decided to head back to Warsaw to find them. Upon not finding his family in Warsaw, George's father hired a horse and carriage driver to swiftly take him back to Bialystok. Eventually, George's father and the driver arrived at a bridge controlled by Nazis that they needed to cross. There was a long line of people being processed, and anyone Jewish was being pulled out and taken away.
So he, sitting back, observed that there is a wide enough passage for the horse and carriage to get onto the bridge. And suddenly he charges the horses and he goes for this passage, and he manages to get onto the bridge. By the same token, he created a lot of commotion. People were in the queue, dispersing in all directions. Germans became somewhat disoriented what was going on. By the time they found themselves, shots were fired towards the carriage, missing the target, and the carriage proceeded onto the other side. And luck has it that the Russians announced officially that they are looking for technically skilled individuals, and the professions they're looking for were mechanics, electricians, engineers, draftsmen. So my father sees a new opportunity, and he puts his name forward with the Russians as an electrician. Of course, he was no electrician, he was a handbag maker, but he lies about his profession because he knew he would be taken out from Bialystok into some other place. And that's what he wanted to achieve. Equally, we were put on the list and taken to the most unhospitable part of Soviet Union, into the northern part of the Ural Mountains, into the Siberian zone. And that's where we survived, and that became our safe haven. And the war years, we lived out in that particular place. We found out that we were the only survivors from a large presence that we had, both families had in Poland. Not a single name surfaced in post-war listings by Red Cross or UNRWA or any other agencies that collected those surviving names. Not a single name of our families again surfaced.
George's determination to change the world by sharing his story is truly remarkable. Even more so because the lesson he has drawn from tragedy, division, and hatred is one of love, connection, and understanding. It was clear through our time together with George that he was extremely passionate about recording his story for the future generations. After hearing George's story firsthand, it was hard for us to imagine how George could remain so positive about the future and share such an inspiring message of hope and collaboration. This is his message.
Well, my message mainly is to young generation, and that message is that there is only one race in this world, and it is the human race. And what we see around us, especially here in Australia, is a beautiful, colorful mosaic of different faces from different places, with different experiences, with different cultures, with different religiosities, with different cuisines, and they bring a wealth of experiences and stories with them. This is something that we should share with each other, accept one another, live in harmony with one another. I usually commemorate with the community in the community memorial services. I light the candles for the 6 million, and this is the only expression that I have. I recorded my story for the children, I recorded it for my family, and I shared that story with as many people as I can in order to prevent any such event to take place again. This is the message, is a universal message, and it should not be repeated. There is no one practical way to commemorate. We can commemorate privately, we can commemorate by promoting certain events, by participating in events, right? And sharing common stories, repeating stories of the past. Those stories in 21st century are being recorded, not like it was in the past, where it had to be passed on from one person to another. We have also the evidence as well, and need to preserve that evidence.
As time passes, we must confront a world where we can no longer rely on survivors to be the ones who tell their stories. In their absence, it is our responsibility to carry forward their memory. Through photographs, music, poetry, and more, tonight's commemoration is an exploration of the ways we do just that. The mediums of memory we use to remember those we lost, honor those who survived, and learn from the tragedy so that we can truly say, never again.
Language leads to communication, which leads to community, to understanding, intimacy, and mutual valuing. Learning a foreign language is a medium which allows us to connect with the real and lived experience of others and see the world as they do. One aspect of pre-Ashkenazic culture which cannot be understated is the significance of Yiddish as the spoken language for the majority of European Jewry. Approximately 70% of Jews before the Shoah spoke Yiddish, and 85% of the 6 million Jews who were murdered in the Shoah were Yiddish speakers. In the post-war era, a mere 600,000 Yiddish speakers remain worldwide, in comparison to the 13 million that existed before 1939. This has led many to characterize the language as officially dead, a definition which is being actively resisted by some members of the Jewish community. One of those resisting the language's demise is Holocaust survivor and Melbourne local Danielle Charak, whose story will be told by her granddaughter, Miriam Charak.
Okay. It says it's recording, right?
Yep.
Okay, so I hope it goes somewhere that I can find it afterwards. Okay, so mine... How do you say first?
Erste.
Erste, I knew that. Meine erste Frage. Was gedenkst du? Ich habe eine Frage für dir, aber how do you say, wie
Sagt man.
sagt man, ja? Wie sagt man Holocaust in Yiddish?
Gruben.
Gruben, okay. Okay, so, was gedenkst du wegen Jiddisch in einem Gruben? Hast du Jiddisch gesprochen? Hast du Jiddisch gehört? Gehört.
Und meine Eltern haben schon geredet sehr wenig Jiddisch in der Heim, in der Zeit von der Milchome. Und ich bin gewesen in der Heim bis 1943.
Ja.
Januar 1943. In Januar 1943, ich bin gewesen 4 Jahre alt.
Ja.
Ich hab noch nicht geredet, kein Jiddisch. Ich hab bloß gekannt einen Satz. Und der Satz ist gewesen, ich bin ein Jiddisch Mädele.
Ja.
Das ist gewesen der einzige Satz, was ich hab gekannt auf Jiddisch.
Und
das ist gewesen ein Satz, was ich hab nicht getraut sagen.
Ja.
Nicht getraut sagen. Ich bin rein zu einer belgischen Mischproche im Januar 1943.
I had my first Yiddish lesson at 9 a.m. on the morning of Wednesday, the 24th of February, 2021. I was 24 years old, and I'd never spoken Yiddish in my life beyond, the casual oy vey. My parents didn't speak Yiddish, and I didn't have any friends who spoke Yiddish either. I'd heard on the family grapevine a few weeks earlier that my cousin Samuel had started Yiddish lessons with my savta, and I'm one of those people who hears someone else is doing something and I think, I must be missing out on something. So I messaged Safta. She lives in Melbourne, but don't worry, she's very good at WhatsApp. And soon we had our first lesson in the calendar. To give you a couple of pieces of context. First, remember it was February 2021. I had just seen my 82-year-old Safta for the first time in over a year when she managed to make it to Sydney for my sister's wedding during the Northern Beaches outbreak. I know, what a throwback. Travel expectations were at a pretty low point, and I wasn't expecting to see her much in the near future. At the time, I was also going into my honours year at uni, which I knew would involve many, many hours of keeping my laptop company. And I think that a part of me kind of thought, this will be nice, I'll see my grandmother once a week, albeit on Zoom, it'll be good bonding time, and maybe it'll also be a good reprieve from the horrors of writing a thesis. So that's a bit about where I was at the time. A second piece of context. My Safta is a teacher, a French teacher, a Jewish history teacher, and a Yiddish teacher. I had grown up hearing about her Yiddish students at Mount Scopus College, the Yiddish radio channel she hosted in Melbourne in the 80s and 90s, and Yiddish events at the Kadima, Melbourne's Yiddish Cultural Centre. Many times I had heard about how the absence of Yiddish on the first draft of my aunt and uncle's wedding invitation in 1988 had almost caused a permanent family broigus. I'd also heard many times about how my great-grandfather was the founding president of Melbourne's Yiddish primary school, Shalom Aleichem Shul. So I knew that Yiddish was really important to my family. But aside from my grandparents, and now only my grandmother, none of us actually spoke Yiddish. So I thought, now my cousin speaks a bissl Yiddish, efsher kann ich euch sich lernen zu reden a bissl Yiddish. Maybe I too can learn to speak just a little bit of Yiddish. The very first sentence that I learned over Zoom was, Yiddish is a Sprach, Yiddish is a language. The first thing I learned to ask was, Shalom Aleichem, was machst du? Hi, how are you? Or literally, peace be upon you from the Hebrew. What are you making? Was machst du? That's the kind of literal translation. I learned that when someone asks you, was machst du, you might respond, sehr gut, very good, or my Safta's favorite, nicht schlecht, not bad. I learned surprisingly familiar adjectives, freilich, happy, klein, small, schein, beautiful, and even more familiar verbs. Ich lehn, I read, ich schreib, I write, ich spiel, I play. Soon I could count mit 1 bis 20 from 1 to 20, and name the days of the week. And by the way, there's no word in Yiddish for Saturday, it's just Shabbos. I started to get homework. Safta wanted me to write about my week. 3 oder 4 Sätze, just a few sentences. So for example, and I quote from my notebook, Die Woche, jeden Tag, haben wir geguckt die Olympics auf Television. This week, every day, we watched the Olympics on the TV, because you know, the Tokyo Olympics were much better than writing my thesis. As the Yiddish idiom goes, a bissel und a bissel wird a volle Schüssel. Literally, a little bit and a little bit makes a full bowl. Slowly, slowly, the words began to flow a little more easily off my tongue, and the language that means so much to my grandmother started to feel more and more like my language too. My Safta Danielle was born in Brussels, Belgium, in 1939. Her parents, Rivka and Nachman, had moved there from Warsaw 10 years earlier, in search of a better life, away from the anti-Semitism and general hardship they had experienced growing up. As young adults back in Warsaw, they had both become involved in the Bund, a Jewish political movement that arose in Eastern Europe around the same time as Zionism. Like the Zionist movement, the Bund was staunchly anti-religious, viewing religion as backward and oppressive. At the same time, the Bund had a uniquely cultural element. It celebrated and fostered the development of anything and everything Yiddish. Yiddish literature, Yiddish media, Yiddish theatre. It was a way of almost asserting Jewishness in a non-religious way, asserting not only that Jews have a basic right to be treated with dignity, but also that we are people who have self-respect and should be respected. We're educated, we're cultured, we're intelligent, and we're funny. The Bund's obsession with Yiddish culture was a way to celebrate Jewish accomplishment and Jewish difference, but without the strictures of religious observance. The way I think about it, for Rivka and Nachman and their contemporaries, Yiddish was not just a language, it was their culture, it was their life. At the age of 3, my Safta was taken in by a non-Jewish family in Brussels who looked after her until the city was liberated in 1945 and she was reunited with her family. Only then did she start to learn what Jewish community was. In the 5 years her family stayed in Brussels after the war, her parents built up a community around themselves, full of survivors from the East, very often young people who had been connected to the Bund pre-war, like they themselves had been in their previous lives in Warsaw. It was a community built on the ruins of countless old ones, but it was nevertheless vibrant, new, and exciting, full of songs, plays, and impressive people. This is what I asked my Safta about. You can hear it in her own voice.
Meine zweite Frage ist wegen das.
Wegen dem.
Wegen dem. Meine zweite Frage ist, was gedenkst du wegen die Bund in Brüssel nach dem Churban?
Wegen was noch ein Churban?
Wegen die Bund. Die Bund?
Wegen dem Bund.
Dem Bund.
Es ist der Bund. Es ist der Bund, which means the bond, the tie.
Yeah.
And it's the name of an organization.
Ja.
Ich gedenke a Sach wegen dem Bund.
Ja, so was gedenkst du?
Was gedenke ich? Weil meine Eltern seien gewesen Bundisten, seien gewesen ein Teil von der bundischen Partei.
Ja.
Und gleich nach der Milchome, schon in 1945, haben Angehörigen kommen, Leben gebliebene Survivors, Leben gebliebene von den Lagern. Und meine Eltern zusammen mit noch Bundisten, together with other, haben aufgenommen, they received, die Leben gebliebene, was haben gehabt eine Verbindung mit dem Bund.
Was ist Verbindung?
Connection.
Ja.
Connection. Bund, binden, Verbindung, all the same.
Verstehe, ja.
Ja. Sie haben gehabt eine Verbindung, eine Connection mit dem Bund. Also als ich gedenke, eine Sache von den Menschen, die sind damals gekommen und bis zum heutigen Tag kenne ich 5 Menschen, gedenke ich jetzt, was leben noch. 3 in Melbourne
Ja.
und 2 in Los Angeles. Das ist gewesen eine Gruppe Junge, die sind einen Tag gekommen von den Lagern, die haben übergelebt, die Lagern. Mein Tate ist gewesen der Kommandant. Er hat angeführt mit dem ganzen Lager. Und meine Mama hat sich vernommen mit der Kirche, mit dem Essen. Und ich fliege vor mit sie, weil sie haben nicht gehabt, wo mich überzulassen. They didn't have where to leave me. Jetzt fliege ich vor und ich fliege sein auf die Lager und ich gedenke die alle Menschen. Und als Sache von sie sind gekommen in Melbourne. Und das ist gewesen für sie ein neues Leben.
Ja.
Sie haben gespielt Instrumenten, they played instruments.
Ja.
Und sie haben gesungen und mein Tate hat geführt Lektionen mit sie.
Ja.
Ja, und das gedenke ich sehr, sehr gut.
One of the things I was asked was to try to communicate what it means to me to learn Yiddish. Like I said, I'm a bit shallow. It all started off with a bit of jealousy and FOMO. So I asked my cousin Samuel what had drawn him to learn Yiddish. He sent me a couple of voice notes, and instead of paraphrasing, I will actually quote them directly. So I quote, "I think language is an entry point to understanding the people who speak that language. So if you really want to understand, for example, Italian culture, then learning Italian really, really well is a doorway to understanding more about Italians, and that can teach you more about life. So learning Yiddish is a doorway into our history. By knowing Yiddish, you can gain a deeper, richer understanding of what being Jewish means and what being Jewish meant 100, 200, 500 years ago. When I learn Yiddish, I feel that I'm listening to my Savta's parents, Rivka and Nachman Griffenberg. I feel that I'm listening to the parents of every one of my great-grandparents in their respective shtetl across the Pale of Settlement, Sokal, Stri, Kalush, Kolomeo, Shamorio, Donoserohe. That I'm listening to them as they go about their daily lives, as they trip along to school, as they make chicken soup mit knedlech, as they debate new socialist ideas. And when I speak Yiddish, I feel that I'm speaking to them too." To quote Samuel one more time, "I just get this feeling that Yiddish is this really familiar language that speaks to the deepest part of myself. Not necessarily my conscious self, but just when I hear Yiddish, I'm really aware that it's me and mine." Ich heiße Miriam Charag. Ich lerne sich Jiddisch zu gedenken mein Mishpache und zu gedenken dem Churban und zu machen jiddische Kultur a Sach von der Zukunft, nicht nur von der Vergangenheit. My name is Miriam Charak. I learned Yiddish to remember my family and to remember the Churban, the Holocaust, so that Yiddish culture is not just of the past, but of the future as well.
In the Jewish tradition, the flame of a candle is thought to represent the human soul. On Yom HaShoah, we light candles for all those who had their lives stolen from them. Because in the words of Holocaust survivor Edith Eger, we cannot choose to vanish the dark, but we can choose to kindle the light. I would like to invite Miriam Charak, third-generation survivor of the Holocaust, to light the first candle. We light this candle in memory of the deep and rich Jewish life and culture that was disrupted, tarnished, and in many cases lost during the war. And we also light it in honor of the non-Jewish family in Brussels who saved Miriam's Savta, and all of the righteous among the nations who ensured that all was not lost.
We are all familiar with the power of music in telling a story and moving us emotionally in some way. Composer Sam Weiss speaks to us about his creative process in crafting stories through music and how it allowed him to commemorate the Shoah through a medium that was especially meaningful for him. Sam was inspired to create a musical composition based upon a poem written by his great-grandmother for his grandmother in Berlin, Germany, just before the war broke out. Sam has created a timeless and universal composition that ensures that the memory of the Shoah will forever be passed on.
In 2015, my father received a phone call from the Sydney Jewish Museum. "Mr. Weiss," they said, "we've come into possession of something that we think you should come and see." The museum had been donated an item that had mysteriously resurfaced in a pawn shop in Bondi and purchased by a man who kept it in his personal collection, only to donate the diary to the Jewish Museum in honour of the 70th anniversary of the liberation of Auschwitz-Birkenau. This item was my late grandmother Nellie's autograph book. That's my dad's mum, and my cousins and I called her Bubba, and actually she passed away 4 years ago yesterday. She took this autograph book with her as a young girl when she and her family fled Berlin to New York and ultimately to Sydney, Australia in 1938. It contains 63 pages filled with poems, drawings, and letters from family and friends that were a part of this journey and into school years in Sydney. Tragically, most of these inscriptions are from victims of the Shoah. In 2020, I was selected to be the composer in residence for the Sydney Children's Choir in a cultural partnership with the Sydney Jewish Museum. As part of this residency, which stretched into last year, I was commissioned to write a suite of pieces that focused on the Holocaust. This was an incredible opportunity to educate children that otherwise would not be exposed to our history and our story through the power of music as a medium of memory. I instantly felt the gravitas of the task at hand. Some of the children in the choir were as young as 6, going all the way up to 18 years old. I asked myself, how do we expose children as young as 6 to such a dark period of human history? With this challenge in mind, I decided to focus on the core messages and lessons that I wanted to impart onto the children, lessons that I wanted the children to walk away with after learning my music. These were resilience, coexistence, peace, remembrance, and community. And where better to look for inspiration than a family artefact? So I made arrangements with the museum archives to view Bubba's autograph book. I remember the first time I saw it, I had to put on these special gloves and use a small spatula to handle the delicate pages. One of the inscriptions in the autograph book is a poem written by my great-grandmother, Cecile Merrill, on Bubba's 7th birthday, the 5th of September, 1936. It beautifully expresses a mother's love for her young daughter as she dreams of a better life beyond what was on offer in pre-war Germany at the time. Of course, coming into contact with my great-grandmother's handwriting, who I'd never had the opportunity to meet, was a very personal and emotional experience for me. I was instantly inspired by not just the beauty of her almost calligraphic handwriting, but also by the words she expressed. I ultimately decided to set this poem to song, and I named it Deine Mummy. In English, this means your mummy, after the way my great-grandmother had signed off the poem. As I don't speak or understand German, we were lucky enough to have these little inserts in English which the donor of the autograph book had translated himself. But given the poeticism of the German, its rhyme, its meter, I knew that I wanted to honour the language of my great-grandmother. I instantly reached out to a friend in Berlin, for a transliteration and recording of the German, Sandra Trety, who just so happens to be a musician and artist herself.
I thought I'm just going to read this to you in case you need to know how to pronounce things, maybe. They're really sweet, by the way, especially the first one. Ich war bei dir wohl manche Nacht, hast du mich nicht erkannt? Hab oft ob deinen Schlaf gewacht und hielt still deine Hand. Ich lauschte deinem Atemzug wohl manche Stund. Und folgend meines Sehnens Flug sprach Segen dir mein Mund.
I'm very much an oral learner. You'd assume so as a composer. So hearing this from Sandra really elevated the poem into new realms of the imagination. After receiving this voice note, I set about putting the words to song. I imagined my great-grandmother writing this piece while Bubba was asleep one night in their apartment in Berlin. It would have been dimly lit. Bubba would have been innocently and peacefully breathing while her mother was contemplating their dire situation. These sorts of images in my mind really helped me to craft the structure of the piece. It starts with a lullaby-style humming passage, and then I really set about almost word painting with the music. I'd read the poem back aloud, try to find the rhythm of the thing, and then craft melodic lines based on that. And as I settled into that process, it became a little more refined. I started to judge where I felt the climax of the poem was and build towards that musically. Lots of tension and release, so clashing chords that resolve to more consonant harmonies. Things that keep the listeners and singers engaged and really help to tell the story of the poem. It has been the experience of a lifetime to write music with such personal material. This was the first time I had seen my great-grandmother's handwriting, and it was a way of reconnecting with both her and my Bubba and the history of our family. But beyond the personal significance, I really felt like this was a piece that represented the stories of so many. As such, I dedicated the piece to be in honour of all the parents who wanted their children to dream. And thanks to the sacrifices of my family, my Bubba was able to dream again in Australia, where she married my grandfather Dudge and had 3 children, 8 grandchildren, and now 2 great-grandchildren. I have watched the piece take on a life of its own following its performance and recording last year. It was incredible to work with the children's choir, featuring kids from all ethnicities and backgrounds to bring this piece to life. And it has now reached so many in Australia and internationally. I was recently contacted by a conductor in Dresden, Germany, to teach the piece to children there, and it's just incredible to think of the cyclicality of that, the very place my family fled, being taught this piece. And just a few weeks ago, I was contacted by the conductor of one of the world's top choirs, Voces 8, who are teaching the piece to a group of 250 underprivileged children in France. So I received that very cute video from the choir, and they're using the piece to help the kids learn about their own heritage, and they're putting together a performance with a slideshow of their families behind them, and I can't wait to see this perform next month. It's just amazing. But really at the core of all this, and why I'm speaking to you tonight, is because the onus is really on us as the next generation, as our last survivors sadly pass on. It's up to us to tell our stories, the stories of our heritage, our families, in whatever ways we can. And yes, we say this to ensure that these atrocities never happen again, but also because these stories resonate. This project has been proof of that. What is it that you can do to preserve our own history in an age where this is being challenged by misinformation, fake news, and conspiracy theories? Well, I'd say taking first-hand accounts of survivors is paramount. I set a family poem to song, and we have all experienced the power of music in some way or another, music being such a powerful storytelling medium. Ask yourselves, what do you have at home from your grandparents that you can use to tell your story? Is it a Chanukiah from their hometown? A photo album? A recipe? Or is it you? The fact that you're inextricably linked. You have your grandmother's eyes, your grandfather's sense of humour, or your great-grandmother's tenacity. It is up to us to preserve history, to preserve memory, so that we can truly say, never again. And the onus is on you and me and our generation. Composition was my medium of memory, and I'm committed to using it to preserve our history. What is yours?
Sam's composition of Dynamummy was written to inspire and educate children about the Holocaust and their own history through music. Like Sam mentioned, the piece was written in honor of the parents who wanted their children to dream. Those who made immeasurable sacrifices, some with their lives. Therefore, with this in mind, I invite Sam, his father Greg, and sister Mimi to light the second candle for the 1.2 million children who perished in the Holocaust. May the memory of their lives inspire us to live so that we may help to ensure that part of who they were shall endure always.
I distinctly remember when my grandmother passed away, going through photos and wishing I had more. Photography is a way that many people commemorate any occasion, happy or sad. Photographer Ralph Hattersley once said, "We are making photography to understand what our lives mean to us." In 2017, my grandmother Vera, or as we knew her, Ormi, took part in a project at the Sydney Jewish Museum named Closer, Portraits of Survival. It was a powerful project that encouraged Shoah survivors to be professionally photographed with an object of significance to them and their story, allowing them to show the world what the Shoah meant to them and what these significant objects meant in relation to their unique stories. For this project, Ormi was photographed with a framed photo of her with her parents after the war. This section will be exploring her story and the medium of photography. My grandmother used this photo to commemorate everything she lost during the Shoah. And now, my family uses this photo and many more photos of her to remember her and her story.
Vera Cortez was born Vierka Martinova on the 7th of October 1933 in Košice, Czechoslovakia, which is now Slovakia. She grew up in Prešov, Czechoslovakia, approximately 100 kilometers away. And when she was 6 years old, Czechoslovakia was annexed by Nazi Germany in December of 1939. My mother, like so many others, was forced to wear the yellow star on all clothing to signify her Jewishness. She was bullied and teased by her closest friends on the way to school, and once at school, when anti-Semitism was normalised and encouraged. Mum was very relieved when she was no longer required to attend school in 1940. Mum converted to Greek Orthodoxy, amazing as that sounds, and was looked after by Greek Orthodox nuns in a convent on the outskirts of Prešov. She was taken away by her mother once the Jews started to be deported to work camps, and they escaped to Hungary. In order to allay suspicion, she had to pretend to be mentally disabled or deaf and mute and to never speak Slovak for the first 6 months when she arrived in Hungary because she couldn't speak Hungarian. She and her mother survived due to a combination of luck, determination, and her mother's uncanny ability to sense when to move before a town or an area was raided for Jews. Once the deportations in Hungary started in 1944, they were placed in a ghetto in a small Hungarian town. They escaped the ghetto 3 days before it was liquidated, and all the Jews were deported to Auschwitz. Later in the war, towards the end, they hid in sewers and nearly died of starvation. One time a horse died in the street above them, and the Jews hiding under the roads in the sewers ate the horse raw in order to survive. Mum and her parents were liberated by Russian soldiers in early 1945 and were actually terrified of what would happen to them. But they were treated well by the Russians. They went back to Prešov and remained there in the hope that some family members would return, but none ever did. Czechoslovakia consequently became communist in 1948 as a Russian satellite state, and the family could no longer emigrate to Israel as they had originally planned. My mum missed her whole primary school education, 6 years in total, from ages 6 to 12. She caught up and eventually duxed her high school, albeit at nearly 19 years of age. She was left with trauma, damage, and severe PTSD for the rest of her life due to her 6 years of constant and unimaginable fear, worry, and anxiety. In her lifetime, any time there was a sound of a gunshot or thunder and lightning, she would instantly be transported back in time to those years and would cower undercover wherever she was, including public events, including her time as a doctor lecturing students at the University of New South Wales.
This photo was how my grandmother remembered the Shoah. That framed photo of her and her parents represented so much more than survival. It represented loss. That photo was symbolic of every member of her extended family that was not in the photo. Every auntie, uncle, and cousin who did not survive. That photo represented everyone and everything that was not in the photo. And now, that photo represents someone we have lost. Someone who is in the photo, but no longer in our lives. However, I think the photo means something more. This photo of her at 16 years old after the war had ended represented to her the childhood that she never had. Omi never got to be a child. She never got to have a childhood. She never got to be carefree. She never got to have freedom, to be happy. She spent her childhood in fear. Every year we commemorate Yom HaShoah. We remember, appreciate, and mourn the people we lost. We celebrate the people who survived and hear their stories. However, what is often overlooked is that every survivor lost 6 years of their lives to the Shoah. They were not able to be happy, to celebrate birthdays, to go out dancing, to see their friends. My grandmother lost so many people to the Shoah, but she also lost a part of herself. The whole point of taking pictures is so that you don't have to express things in words. That photo represents the part of my grandmother that she lost, that carefree child that every person has inside of them, that family that could not be there. That family photo of 3 survivors of the Holocaust was not symbolic of survival, but rather everything that was not in the photo, everything that was lost.
We light this candle in memory of all of those who perished and who cannot be named, those individuals whose identity was taken, whose dreams were lost, and whose hopes were dashed. We light this candle in memory of all the names, all 6 million.
Zognit Kainmo is a song written by Hirsch Glick, a young Jewish inmate of the Vilna Ghetto. This song, the medium of this section, became the anthem of Jews in the Vilna Ghetto, spreading to labor and concentration camps as well as the Jewish partisans. One of those partisans was Mai Zeda Oskar Barecki. As one of the Belsky partisans, Mai Zeda participated in the Jewish resistance movement against Nazi Germany. They sung this song during the war as an anthem of courage, defiance, and a will to survive. Following the war, Mai Zeda never stopped singing the partisan song, and for me and my family, this song remains a symbol of him and his resistance.
Zeta was 11 years old when the Germans occupied Novarok, a small Polish town that was 50% Jewish. Him and his family were forced into the ghetto and directed to either the left or right, the side of life or death. Men going to their execution raised their fists and screamed to the remaining survivors, "Take revenge, Nakoma." Zeta's family was taken into the ghetto, where the sounds of screaming and firing echoed as Jews were executed. Each night in the ghetto, the Jews recited Kaddish, praying for those who had been murdered. Zeta was too young to work, and his family were concerned that he would be rounded up in the next execution. His brother Moshe smuggled him onto the roof of a 4-story courthouse, instructing Zeta not to leave until he came calling his grandmother's name. After a few hours, Zeta was overcome with concern, and the smell of death took over. He escaped down the drain pipes, crawling under the fence, and walked 8 kilometers to his uncle's village. Zeta later found out that 18 children were hiding on that rooftop when the Gestapo brought sniffer dogs, throwing each child down into a truck as their parents cried in horror. He was the only child to have survived from the roof. Zeta found his uncle Ruvke in a work camp. At the fence of the camp, he pleaded with his uncle to let him in, as he had nowhere to go. Upset that his uncle would not help him, he left the camp, finding a barn to sleep in overnight. Later, he found out that his uncle and all the people in the camp were gassed the next day. Lost, Zeta snuck back into the ghetto. His father, Joseph, knew that there was no chance for his whole family to survive. He told Zeta to leave the ghetto and not return. He said, "Listen carefully. From now on, you are no longer a Jew. You have hope and you can survive. Geh Gesundheit." Zeta escaped into a nearby forest where he waited for his brother Eli to join him. Eli never came. At the age of 11, he would never see his parents and brothers ever again. Making his way through the forest, he faced pits of bodies with children and adults, some of whom he recognized. He remembered that this instilled him with ambition and determination to survive. He had heard about the Belsky partisans who were operating in nearby forests. He walked over 60 kilometers towards the Belsky brothers' village and along the way slept in barns, haystacks, and fields, completing jobs for peasants in exchange for food and shelter. He made contact with a partisan connection and was told to wait in the forest for a few days until the partisans collected him. Days later, a horse and cart appeared, with Jews speaking Yiddish. Zeta was collected by his family friend, who informed him that his sister Fruma had already joined the partisans. He hugged his family friend and cried uncontrollably. She told him, "The Belskys will look after you. With us, you are safe." And where a spurt of our blood has fallen, there will sprout our strength, our courage. Zeta arrived at the partisan campsite, where guards on horses surrounded the outskirts of the camp. Jews walked with rifles, without fear. At that time, there were 250 Jewish partisans, led by Tuvia Belsky and his brothers. The partisans included men and women of all ages, whom had set up workshops to repair guns, make clothes, supply services to other non-Jewish partisan groups, and had even created a hospital. They led retaliatory raids against peasants who collaborated with the Germans against their former Jewish neighbors, derailed trains, and destroyed bridges and telephone lines, all in an effort to weaken the German supply line. Prior to missions, they would sing the partisan song, instilling courage and strength. A people between falling walls sang this song with pistols in their hands. Zeta volunteered to undertake dangerous missions, learning how to embody a new identity, observe Nazi activity, deliver messages, ride horses, and gain resources for the partisans' survival. The partisans generally operated under the cover of darkness. However, he operated alone during the daytime, often coming into close contact with German soldiers. To me now, this is incomprehensible, as my Zeta was only around 13 years old at the time. At the end of the war, 1,200 Jewish partisans survived. My Zeta and his sister returned to their hometown, finding that their house had been bombed. Their worst fears were confirmed. They were the only survivors from the Berecki family and two of very few Jews from their town who had survived. He recalled feeling like ghosts in their hometown. When recounting his experiences, my Zeta said, "I had a big family. I lost them all. I believe I have to make a contribution and prove that we as Jews are alive and we have a continuation." He asked himself, how did I survive? There were so many times that I shouldn't have survived. Times where I conducted missions with Germans in the same villages. Maybe I survived to tell you what happened. When asked what his message was, he responded, "My message is for the world to remember. Quite often people forget and ignore it. Remember, this has happened. It is not a story. It happened to me and my family." The morning sun will brighten our day, and yesterday will disappear with our foe. But if the sun delays to rise at dawn, then let this song be a password for generations to come. The song Zognit Kainmo guided him and the partisans through unimaginably hard times, filling them with courage and giving them the power to resist. This song also embodies everything that my Zeta stood for, as he had a contagious optimism and strength. I feel that this song connects me with my Zeta and his experiences. The partisans fought back for all the Jewish people who could not, and sought revenge by surviving. My Zeta would sing this song at attention as an anthem with a pride in his voice that was captivating. When I hear Zognit Kainmo, I feel privileged to be a Jew and my Zeta's granddaughter. Never say that you are walking the final road. Though leaden skies obscure blue days, the hour we have been longing for will still come. Our steps will drum, we are here.
See, we got our dignity back, you see. We feel ourselves less and more proud. Jewish partisans used to go on certain jobs. They used to kill Germans, used to kill what you call it, traitors, which used to... There was still some sort of a Jewish happiness, you see. And then there was also a song, we heard about this song, which was written in Vilna Ghetto. And this song also, we knew it, and also then in the end of the, before the end of the war in the party, we sing the same song. The song tells you, "Sag nicht keinmal," this is how it sings. "Sag nicht keinmal, als du gehst dem letzten Weg. Himmel und Bläue wollen verstellen bläue Tag. Kommen wird noch unser ausgebänkte Show. Es wird klappt und unser Trott wir seien da. Von grünem Peinland bis weißem Land von Schnee. Wir kommen an mit unser Pein, mit unser Weh. Und wo gefallen ist der Sprotz von unser Blut, Sprotz und wird noch unser Wure und der Mut." It's a song goes on, but this is a song which was written in Vilna Ghetto, which tells you, don't ever say you're going your last journey. Don't ever say this is the end, this is it, it's not the end.
When we tell the story of the Shoah, we must remember those who stood up against injustice when it seemed nearly impossible. Resistance during the Shoah existed in many ways, whether it be physical or spiritual resistance. We must pass on the legacy and lessons of those who stood up in times of darkness. I now invite Kara and her father Eric to light this candle in memory of Oscar Berecki, the partisans, and all those who fought for the continuity of the Jewish people.
I did not have a chance to say goodbye to my beloved mother, and I have missed her every day of my life. If you have the opportunity today, please go home and make sure you tell your mom how much you love her. Please do this for your new friend, Eddie. I do not hate anyone. Hate is a disease. which may destroy your enemy, but will also destroy you in the process. Happiness does not fall from the sky. It's in your hands. If you're healthy and happy, you're a millionaire. Happiness also brings good health to the body and mind, and I attribute to my 99 years of health mostly to the positive and happy attitude. One flower is my garden. One good friend is my world. Young people today forget to stop. They're constantly running and don't know where they're running to. You should take time to be happy and enjoy life. There is a time to laugh and there's a time to cry. I wonder how people exist without friendship, without people to share their secret hopes and dreams, to share good fortune or sad losses. In the sweetness of friendship, let there be laughter and sharing of pleasure. Good times made better and bad times forgotten, due to the magic of friendship. Remember these words. Please do not walk in front of me. I may not be able to follow. Please do not walk behind me. I may not be able to lead. Just walk beside me and be my friend.
Words preserve our hearts and minds like nothing else. They inspire, motivate, and move us. Words tell us who we are, who we might be. And in the end, words are what we leave behind. When we commit our lives to paper, when we share our stories with the world, we join an ancient legacy, 3,500 years in the making. Words connect us to our past, and connect our past to future generations. Eddie Jaku understood this better than anyone. Released in 2020, Eddie's memoir, The Happiest Man on Earth, is a record of his remarkable life and stands as testament to his enduring legacy. Born in Germany in 1920, Eddie lived a normal life until the rise of Adolf Hitler. Forced to hide his Jewish identity at boarding school, Eddie returned home on the 9th of November 1938, Kristallnacht, the night of broken glass. He was beaten within an inch of his life and watched his beloved family dog killed by brown shirts. Over the next 4 years, Eddie was bounced from concentration camps to forced labour camps, arrested for being Jewish and for being a German refugee. When he was finally reunited with his parents, it was cut cruelly short. Eddie lost them both on arrival at Auschwitz. When the war ended, Eddie made a new life for himself. He moved to Australia in 1950 with his wife Flor, and before long, they became a family of 4. After years of silence, Eddie cautiously began sharing his story with the world. As a founding member of the Sydney Jewish Museum, at first, it was other members. Before long, it was museum visitors, then school kids, until later, when he would speak to auditoriums of people in their hundreds and their thousands. From all around the world, from all walks of life, people were drawn to Eddie because of his extraordinary ability to draw universal lessons from his uniquely tragic experience. In doing so, he built bridges between himself, our Jewish community, and the rest of the world. At 99, he knew that he would only be here to tell his story for so long. In releasing his memoir, Eddie ensured his story and his message would be preserved for generations to come. Eddie opens his book by declaring the reader his new friend. To Eddie, nothing was more important than friendship. He believed that a friend was someone who reminds you to feel alive. Each of us who reads Eddie's words, each of us who becomes his new friend, feels alive for having read them and keeps a part of Eddie alive with us too.
Holocaust survivor Eddie JQ has many reasons to hate, but instead chooses to find every reason to smile.
Eddie JQ describes himself as the happiest man in the world. We wonder if perhaps he is also the wisest.
He walks into Auschwitz with his parents. He never sees them.
But despite everything he's been through and everything he's seen, he has declared himself the happiest man on earth.
You know, we're all given the same emotion. They're all in us. And you forget sometimes that it is a choice which ones we decide to lean into, whether it's love or hate.
In his book, The Happiest Man on Earth, Eddie JQ recounts his survival and then misery after the war.
What an incredible book. His outlook on life is inspiring. Pick it up, read it, and learn something from it.
Eddie é algo impactante.
Sobre esse livro precioso.
Happiest Man on Earth. 那世界上最幸福的人。
He has a lot of wisdom. I love his attitude. Hugely, it's great, inspiring, and I thank him so much for writing it.
I look at this man on the cover, Eddie Jaku, and all the things that he went through, and how he was still able to share these positive messages and talk about kindness, forgiveness, being happy. I encourage you to go and read this story. It's inspiring. It's inspired me.
For me, when I wake up, I'm happy because it is another day to enjoy. When I remember that I should have died a miserable death, but instead I'm alive, so I am aimed to help people who are down. I was at the bottom of the pit, so if I can make one miserable person smile, I am happy. I'm doing everything I can to make this world a better place for everyone. And I implore you all to do your best too. Let us ensure that this terrible tragedy, the worst in the history, may never happen again, and also will never ever be forgotten. May you always have lots of love to share, lots of good health to spare, and lots of good friends that care. Thank you.
I invite Michael Jaku, Eddie's son, and Mark Jaku, Eddie's grandson, to light this candle. We light this candle in memory of Eddie and all the survivors who are no longer with us. We thank them for their strength, their resilience, and their willingness to share their stories. In all that we do, we hope to carry on their legacy and their strength.
Tonight began with a question. What does it mean to commemorate? We would like to leave you with an answer. To commemorate is to remember. Zachor, the Hebrew word for remember, appears in the Torah nearly 200 times. Anyone who's been to a Pesach Seder knows that for better or for worse, Jews remember. But Zachor is not just about facts or figures. When we remember, we honor the pain of the past and grapple with what it tells us about the future. Zachor is remembering who we are. Zachor is remembering where we have been. Zachor is remembering where we are going. In the 77 years since the end of the Holocaust, survivors have carried the burden of its memory for our community. As time passes, we confront a world where survivors are no longer here to tell their stories. It is now our responsibility to remember. I'd like to invite Holocaust survivor and my dear friend, George Sternfeld, to come and light the sixth and final candle of this evening, along with Rabbi Tsuri to lead the memorial prayer.
We light this final candle in memory of the 6 million, the 1.5 million children, the Roma, Sinti, Jehovah's Witness, homosexuals, people of colour, the mentally and physically disabled. We light this final candle in memory of all those who lost their lives on account of who or what they were.
Instead of doing it alone, we're going to do it together. El,
Ela,
Maleh,
Maleh,
Rachamim,
Lachamim,
Shochen,
Shochen,
Bam Romim.
Bam Romim.
Everyone please rise. Hamtzeh,
Hamtzeh,
Menucha,
Menucha,
Nechona,
Nechuna,
Al,
Kanfei,
HaShekhinah,
Ashikana,
B'ma'alot,
Ma'alot,
Kedoshim,
Kiddushim,
U'tehorim,
U'tehorim,
Kezohar,
Kezohai,
Harakia,
Harakia,
Mazhirim,
Mazurim,
Et, Nishmot,
Nishmot,
HaKedoshim,
HaKodeshim,
Vehatehorim,
Veteharim,
Shehumtu,
Shehom Tu,
Veshenehergu,
Veshehenu,
Veshenishchatu,
Veshehatu,
Veshenisrefu,
Veshenisrefu,
Veshenit be'u,
Veshenit Vehu,
Veshenechneku,
Veshenet Neku,
Al Kiddush Hashem, Al Yedei Hatzorim Hagermanim Yemach Shemam Vezichram Ba'avor Shebli Neder Eten Tzedakah Be'ad Hazkarat Nishmotehem Began Eden Tehe Menuchatam Lechen Baal Harachamim Yastirem Beseter Kenafaf Leolamim Veitzror Betzror Hachaim Et Nishmotehem Adonai Hu Nachalatam Veyanuchu Beshalom Al Mishkovotehem Venomar Amen. We'll conclude with the Kaddish prayer as well. Itkadal
Veitkadash, Shemei,
Rabbah,
Be'alma,
Di,
Vera,
Chirutei,
Ve'yamrich,
Malchutei,
Bechayechon,
U
Bechomeon,
Bechaye,
Techol, Bet, Israel, Ba'agala, Uvizman, Kariv, Ve'imru, Amen. Yehei, Shemei, Rabbah, Mavorach, Leolam, Uleolmei, Almaya, Itzparach, Veishtabach, Veitpar, Veitramam, Veitnaseh, Veithadar, Veithaleh, Veithalal, Shemei, Vechucha, Bechu, Leila, Min, Kol, Berchata, Veshirata, Tushbechata, Venechamata, Damiran, Be'alma, Ve'imru, Amen. Yehei,
Shlama,
Shlama,
Rabba,
Rabba,
Min,
Min,
Shemaya,
Shemaya,
Bechaim,
Vechaim,
Aleinu,
Aleinu,
Ve'al,
Ve'al,
Kol,
Kol,
Israel,
Israel,
Ve'imru,
V'omnu,
Amen.
Amen.
Ose,
Ose,
Shalom,
Shalom,
Bimromav.
Bimara.
Hu,
Hu,
Yaseh,
Yaseh,
Shalom,
Shalom,
Aleinu,
Aleinu,
Ve'al,
Ve'al,
Kol,
Kol,
Israel,
Israel,
Ve'imru,
Ve'imru,
Amen.
Amen.
He who makes peace in his heights, may he make peace upon us and upon all Israel. Now respond, Amen.
Amen. Tonight's commemoration will conclude with the singing of Hatikva, literally the hope. Composed 70 years prior to the birth of the State of Israel and sung by survivors upon their liberation, the anthem crystallizes the peculiarly Jewish conviction that no matter how bad things seem, in spite of all evidence to the contrary, something better awaits us. Our hope is that tonight we commit to adopting our shared responsibility, to keep telling our stories, to never let the world forget. Because in the words of late Rabbi Lord Jonathan Sacks, it is only through doing so that we might bring the world, that is, a little closer to the world as it ought to be. As you leave the commemoration, you will hear a song composed by Sam Weiss called Enosh. This song was composed in memory of all the children, all 1.5 million, who perished in the Shoah. Thank you for joining us tonight in honoring those who perished in the Shoah, applauding those who actively fought for the rights of their fellow human beings and bearing witness to the testimony and resilience of those who survived. Please rise for the singing of Hatikva, led by Eden Shivroni.
Nefesh Yehudi, hold me.